So initially, the idea was that there's more and more interest within the tech community for basic income as a policy. And that's, because there is an increased concern that current technological developments might lead to a very bleak future for jobs, and that we should start worrying about what we are going to do when robots are taking over.
The age of robots has been anticipated since the beginning of the last century.
Are the droids taking our jobs?
The list of companies planning to replace human jobs with machines is growing.
47% of jobs in America are at or will be at risk of automation over the next 2 decades.
This is the single biggest job category in America.
That's correct.
And it could go away within the next 2 decades.
That's the fear.
If you've already heard about Universal Basic Income, or UBI, it was likely in this context, as a way to respond to job loss due to increasing automation. This is where most of the interest in UBI from Silicon Valley, where Stanford is based, comes from. Tech leaders like Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk, for example, have come out in favor of basic income because they claim to see it as the most sensible way of avoiding inevitable mass unemployment. Turns out this perspective is just one part of the story. Here's Juliana again.
The kind of automation-driven interest in basic income is really the dominant one right here, right now. And so the idea of the course was to bring computer scientists, mechanical engineers, people getting interested in basic income because they are kind of realizing the social responsibility they have, to bring them to see that the basic income debate can't be reduced to the automation debate, and that there are, many, many different arguments for basic income coming from a variety of different perspectives. And in fairness, I lived in Europe for a long time, for most of my life, just really recently here in the US. And I actually been writing on basic income, reading on basic income, and automation was like a very, very small part of the puzzle. So the idea of the class was to show that, there is an interesting discussion on the freedom-based argument for basic income, right? So some libertarians, some neoliberals have argued that basic income is the instrument of freedom. It will free people to do whatever they might want to do with their time. And so there's a debate within kind of more liberal leaning theories of justice. And then we do kind of a week on the egalitarian arguments for basic income, and also the egalitarian concern that, basic income might not be enough, and basic income might not in itself be sufficient to reduce inequalities. And so it might even be in some kind of cynical critiques, it might even be a Trojan horse of neoliberalism.
By a Trojan horse of neoliberalism, Juliana is referring to the questionable intentions behind the push for a basic income that comes from the right of the political spectrum, predominantly from neoliberals and libertarians. The idea behind these versions of a basic income is that we should abolish public services entirely and simply give people the cash instead so that they can purchase all their services on the market. Things like welfare programs, public housing, healthcare, and in some extreme cases, even public education spending would be cut entirely and replaced by a basic income. On the other hand, a progressive or egalitarian UBI would likely replace some services because things like unemployment benefits or food stamps may become redundant, but most public services would still remain intact. A progressive version would also be high enough to ensure that the policy would create a truly free labor market, where workers could freely choose the work they want to do or even whether or not to engage in paid work at all. If the income level was not high enough to ensure this freedom, UBI might actually serve as a subsidy for employers who could get away with paying lower wages by relying on the basic income to make up the difference. As you can see, the left-wing and right-wing versions of basic income are quite different and would have radically different effects on society. Here's Juliana again with the rest of the course.
We also have a week where we discussed kind of whether basic income can help foster a more gender-just society. We have a week on racial justice and basic income. Black Lives Matter has endorsed basic income as part of their manifesto. And that's, I think, something that doesn't really get discussed very much. But there are very, very strong reasons to believe that basic income will benefit those who are least well off in this society. And so it might have an important impact on racial justice. And so we do almost 7 weeks of that. And then we arrive at automation. And so they see that automation is actually, it's an important part of the puzzle that needs to be taken seriously and needs to be studied. but it's definitely not the entire debate. And that's really important to separate it out, simply because we might want to say, well, look, we still need to resist some technological changes anyway and fight for basic income. It's not that we have to accept those changes and then support basic income. We might want to accept those changes and go for basic income, but it's not necessary. They don't necessarily work together. And I think that message is very important.